Let's introduce David Kurten to the Independent Republic. David, very good morning to you. Welcome.
Morning. Good to be with you, mate.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed for joining us. I've been meaning to get you on for a while. It suddenly finally managed to get around to it because you're quite a figure for the right in this country now. You were with UKIP some time ago. You've now decided to form the Heritage Party, which we'll talk about in a minute. But let me get your views first of all on what this government is doing and how this lockdown is affecting businesses in London. You're a London Assembly member. You must talk to a lot of business people. What's your view?
It's terrible and it's appalling and it's devastating to civil liberties and it's devastating to businesses. It's devastating to ordinary people who are like taxi drivers and carers who, they can't get around. And, people just can't do what they should be allowed to do. So everything that's been happening is completely disproportionate, as Desmond Swain said yesterday in the House of Commons, to the severity of this SARS-CoV-2 virus, which we know is no more worse than in a bad flu season. When it started, I was really worried. I thought, this could be something that's like the Black Death or Ebola or something, but it's not. It's clearly not now we've got data.
Well, certainly, I think we were all very much more concerned back in March than we are now. And for my money, there's a great growing sense in the country that the measures are disproportionate, that we shouldn't be doing what we're now doing, and it's not a second wave, and we don't really see the reason why we're getting these warnings again like we got in March. We can't have the NHS overrun. I'm told that the hospital's never been quieter.
Yeah, I've heard that as well from people I know working in the NHS. And, the first lockdown, as they call it, didn't actually do anything different to Sweden, which didn't have a lockdown. And now they're in a far better position than us. I mean, in fact, if you look at the deaths per million people, I mean, it's horrible to think like that, but they're actually have a lower death rate per capita than we do. And they didn't do lockdown. So locking down the first time is now proven to be, have no real effect and no need. So the idea that we're going to do this a second time, I think is egregious and it's going to cause untold damage unnecessarily. And I think some people are saving face. Some people, they're scared of being called names and going outside of the, accepted thing that they can say, if they're in politics. But I think, the MPs really need to stand up, be brave, be courageous, and do the right thing. Look at the data and see we don't need this because the cure is going to be far, far worse than the disease.
Absolutely right. And your friend of mine, Mr. Sadiq Khan, has not exactly played a blinder throughout this either. He's a guy who refuses constantly to come on this show, even when a Metropolitan Police officer is shot dead inside a Metropolitan Police station. He even refused to come on and talk to us then. I mean, his policies have been all over the place for London, haven't they?
And they have. I mean, at the very beginning, on the 3rd of March, he said, "Look, you're not going to get it if you go on a tube or on a bus." Right. And then he completely changed around, and now he's been trying to push ahead of the government. He's calling for masks inside, masks outside. Now he wants a lockdown. And close everything down. I mean, it's astounding that the mayor of London wants to shut London down. I mean, London is being destroyed. London is being eaten out from the inside. Central London in particular is dead. We need to open up everything normally. We need to get rid of this ridiculous curfew, which isn't having any effect. I mean, as if COVID is going to let you go between 9 and 10, and then after 10 o'clock is going to get you. I mean, this is a really ridiculous idea. So we need to open up the pubs, open up the restaurants, open up the cafes, and also more than that, theatres and music venues. Yeah. The whole nighttime economy is what makes London thrive in the evening and get people back into the offices in the daytime so that everyone who gets trade from office workers can carry on doing their business. Well, it's astounding the mayor of London doesn't want that.
Well, it is extraordinary, isn't it? And the other thing that I find amazing this morning to wake up to feel, to hear the news that, you're not allowed to now play music over 85 decibels. I mean, I don't even know, for example, if I'm sitting in my car in a traffic jam, of which there are many all over this city, and I've got my window open and I'm blasting out, a version of "We Are the Champions" by Queen or something. Am I going to get arrested?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the police have got far too much more important things to do. I mean, the police should be focused on catching real criminals. They got to catch murderers and arsonists and vandals and thugs. That's what the police should be doing. They shouldn't be going after ordinary people for doing normal things like meeting their friends
Yeah.
or having people into their house or showing their face on a train. That's not what the police should be doing. That's trivial, and those kind of things should not be against the law. And I think this is now just getting utterly ridiculous.
Yeah. Now, I think you were at the march in Trafalgar Square at the weekend. What did you make of the police's behaviour there? Because I get sort of counter and different stories of what happened there. You know, there's a video currently on the rack doing the rounds where that lady who was pushed over in that famous video that everybody's now seen was in fact not who she was pretending to be. I don't know if that's true. You know, there's no doubt though that the police were sort of steaming in to what appeared to be a relatively peaceful protest for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, I was there on Saturday in the crowds, and I was actually there the week before on the stage, and both times I wouldn't have believed this if I hadn't have seen it with my own eyes. But last Saturday, the 26th, they were even more brutal than on the 19th. And the organisers said they'd done a risk assessment. They even held a minute's silence for the policeman who was shot in Croydon.
Yeah.
And everyone joined in a mark of respect. And yet, just about 3 o'clock, you had 2 columns of riot police coming in from both sides of the top of Trafalgar Square. And they weren't coming in to politely ask, can you close this down? They were charging in, hitting people. And the woman there, I think she might not have been exactly who she said she was, and found out that later. But later on, up in Speaker's Corner, some people went up there, and there was this respected German doctor, Heiko Schörning, who spoke on the stage in Berlin. On the 10th, with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He's a respected doctor. And he was arrested and bundled into a van and held in Wandsworth Police Station for 22 hours, just for saying, I don't think that this is worse than a flu season, which is the truth.
Yeah.
So I think.
Well, it's also an opinion, which, as far as I know, is not illegal to have, is it?
Well, it's not, but it seems that you're going to get harassed by the police anyway. And this is shameful, and it's chilling. What's been done to free speech in this country. I mean, this is a sort of thing you imagine would have happened, in the beginnings of Lenin's Bolshevik Revolution, not something that should be happening in London, in Trafalgar Square or in Speaker's Corner. And, we've got to turn back from this. I've been speaking about this for months now from the beginning, and I'm glad that other people are now finding the courage to speak out about this, because we have an accelerating tyranny. It's not yet to the point where you can't say what you want to say, but the government is now saying you can't assemble with who you want to assemble with. And, how long is it before they actually start cracking down on what you say? Because this is what's happening in Victoria, in Australia. They're starting to do that, to clamp down and threaten people with arrest and fines just for saying the wrong thing. So, what happens in one place a few weeks or a few months later, it gets rolled out in other places as well. Yeah. We all have to speak up now.
It really does seem important, because, whatever your view is, you're certainly entitled to examine it. You're certainly entitled to discuss it. I mean, you and I might have a disagreement about something, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be talking about it. And the bottom line for me is it doesn't appear to be anything other than a sign that it's going to get worse from this government than better.
Yeah, it looks like it. And, who can believe this would happen under a Conservative government?
Well,
when I was younger, as a student before UKIP existed, I was in the Conservative Party. I joined as a student, because I believe in free market economics. I believe in freedom, and I also believe in traditional family values, conservative family values. And the Conservative Party doesn't represent any of that anymore. I mean, they certainly don't represent traditional family values. They certainly are now clamping down on freedom and civil liberties in a way which you might expect from the far left. They are being incredibly financially irresponsible as well. I mean, at the beginning of the year, I would say they're wasting money on HS2, on overseas development, on so-called green energy, which doesn't provide much energy at all, and also on the European Union and so on. But now the huge amounts of money that they've wasted and spent on the coronavirus, on track and trace, and on supporting people who, through their policies now don't have a job to go to, to is incredibly irresponsible. I mean, they actually they make Tony Blair look relatively responsible, which is, quite incredible. So
well, it is. It is. I mean, here's the funny thing. People who want to work and people who have businesses like Craig, who called us up in the first hour. I don't know if you heard him say, he just wants to be able to operate his business, which is an events business, but he's being stopped from operating it by government policy. And he doesn't want to be given, and he doesn't get any money from the government anyway, aside from universal credit. But, the government ought to let people make their own living, because there's not a reason for them to stop it, and to then not subsidise them and let them basically go to the wall is criminal in my view.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this shouldn't be happening. The point, any government should support people to do what they want to do, to provide the framework of freedom in the economy so people can get on and they can make their own living. I mean, what kind of country do they want? They're creating a country now where everybody is dependent on the state. I mean, this is like a communist dream. They're doing the exact opposite of what a conservative government should be doing, which is allowing freedom, and then people can get off, their chairs, get out to work and make their own living and make their own way and stand on their own 2 feet. And they're doing exactly the opposite of this again. And yeah, it's criminal. We need to get people back to work, and we need to once again allow people the freedom to do what they want to do and make their own living.
Yeah, let's talk about the Heritage Party. When did you decide to kind of invent your own party? I mean, I can tell that you would normally be, say, a traditionalist, a conservative with a small c. But tell us about the Heritage Party. It stands for liberty and free speech, as you say, defending our heritage, traditional family values, low immigration, national sovereignty, financial responsibility. All sounds good, but it depends on the detail, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, I mean, you can look at our website, heritageparty.org, and the manifesto is there, and it's laid out in more detail. And it's really a manifesto of values and principles. So you've got those headlines, as you say, and there's more detail under them. But I mean, these are things that, are traditional conservative values that I said earlier, the Conservative Party is not standing for. And, I saw this, a while ago. And for the last few years, I've been in politics. Every election you see the Conservative Party stand up and they talk as though they are true conservatives, and then they get into power and then they do the opposite of what they said, and they just carry on, in the sort of Blairite tradition. Cameron was like that, Theresa May carried that on, and now Boris Johnson is no better. I mean, we have, as I say, financial irresponsibility, we have mass immigration. They passed a law recently to make no-fault divorce come in, which is going to be devastating to families and children, and so on. And so we need a real Conservative Party with real conservative values and principles. So I've been working on this, for the last 3 or 4 months. I've put an application into the Electoral Commission. They haven't approved us yet, but I'm hoping to get approval from them very soon. So then we can open up for membership. And then, the aim is to stand in elections in 2021. And I'll be standing for the London mayoral elections. I announced that, as an independent in January, but I'll be standing for the Heritage Party, providing we get approval. Right. And then, we'll put together a list for the London Assembly, and we'll also stand in some local elections as well, because in local boroughs and districts and counties, you have great concern about the devastation being done to the green belt and the countryside, with masses of new housing developments being built, which completely change the character of our towns and cities and villages. And people just don't want that. They don't want mass immigration, which causes a housing crisis, which then causes the need to build millions and millions of extra homes in the countryside, and devastating and changing the character of what was there before. That's not conserving things. And I think, people around the country and local areas want a party that will conserve the natural environment as well as the culture and the society. So that's what we're about, and that's what we'll be saying more of as we actually then announce and roll out our policies for London and for the local areas.
And you call yourself a Christian, David, so tell us about your traditional family values. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very open about that. I think the definition of marriage is a man and a woman. I don't agree with the redefinition of marriage that happened in 2013. I know some people won't agree with me on that, but there isn't a party now that actually stands for that. You've got
I don't think there's any churches that stand for it either, to be honest.
which is, this again is something that is a progressive. The progressive agenda has got into the churches, and you have a lot of the established churches now moving away from Christian orthodoxy. But it's not just Christian; it's Jewish, Muslim, Sikh, Hindus, and social conservatives who perhaps are not religious. Would agree with that and don't agree with the redefinition of marriage, because if you redefine it once, you can redefine it again and again, and the whole sort of fabric of society will then change. So we're very clear. This is what we think is the definition of marriage, and we also we want to.
But how does that manifest itself, though, in your eyes of how you would see a country under your leadership? Because you talk about liberty and free speech, but you don't seem to want to give liberty and free speech to everyone.
Well, liberty and free speech. I mean, you don't have to agree with people. If I say you have the right to say what you want to say, but we're not necessarily going to agree with everything that everyone says. And I think
no, sure. But if you say, for example, you only recognise marriage between a man and a woman, that means you don't recognise marriage between a man and a man, or a woman and a woman. So where does that leave them legally?
Well, this is a difficult question because it's actually been enacted in 2013. But I think if we did come to the point where we could make a new law on this, we would redefine it again as marriage being between a man and a woman. And then going forward, I think we'd have to say, this is the definition of marriage. People who have already sort of done that, in the sort of interim period, I think, that the law shouldn't be changed retrospectively, but we'd have to look at that. But I mean, this is our general position. We want to make sure the marriages are strengthened, and that's it. Because in Christian orthodoxy and tradition, the purpose of marriage is for making a stable family, so you can have children and bring up your children. And that, I think, that's something that's got quite lost from society as a concept. So that's something that I think
society has accepted that there are many types of families that you can be brought up in, which can be just as good as any other. And quite frankly, it would be, I would say, a backward step, would it not, to suggest that only men and women, who quite often are terrible parents, are the ones that raise children.
No, I don't think it would at all. I mean, as I say, I don't agree with the redefinition of marriage. And I think if you do look at the bell curve of success for different types of families, it is sort of known and shown by lots of research that children who come from stable married families with a mother and a father do better in education. They do better, in terms of employment, have lower crime, lower depression, and so on. Now, of course, there will be exceptions within that. But you have but
there's an awful lot of marriages that end in divorce. There's an awful lot of parents that end up as single parents bringing up kids. Some of them do very well, some of them don't. It depends. You can take your choice on that. But let's move on to something else, because at the end of the day, what we need to see, David, in this country really, is a return to normality. The best way we can find that to do. I mean, what conversations can you have, say, for example, with Sadiq Khan about improving the lot of Londoners? Because one of the things that drives me absolutely insane at the moment is his kind of flip-flopping about on public transport. Do we use it? Do we not use it? The roads are an absolute mess. The cycle lanes are a joke. The whole city is, despite the fact that it's empty, seems to be at a standstill.
It is, and I'm standing in the election because that's a big issue for London, because all the other parties, whether it's the Tory party with Grant Shapps at the top and Sadiq Khan and the boroughs, are all pushing this agenda where they're blocking roads off with low traffic neighbourhoods and putting in pop-up cycle lanes over there, which narrow the roads, putting barriers at the curbside, which is making life absolutely appalling for vehicles. I mean, it's almost like they are against all vehicles or all cars. But it's not just cars that are on the road. There's emergency vehicles, taxis, buses, delivery vehicles, service vehicles. They all need to get through, and this is causing huge congestion, huge problems for businesses, huge problems for people who want to get around. So I think I'm the only mayoral candidate who's saying I'll get rid of all of these pop-up cycle lanes and we'll actually put space on the roads back for vehicles,
Yeah.
rather than having half the roads taken up for 2% of journeys taken by cycles who don't, actually use them for most of the day. It's a madness to do that, and we'll reverse it.
It is absolutely right. Well, listen, David, I'm sure we'll talk again. Thank you very much for taking the time to spend with us. David Kurten, who is, of course, leader of the New Heritage Party, yet to be okayed by the Electoral Commission. But when it is, and if it is, he will be standing for Mayor of London next year against Sadiq Khan, a man who, despite numerous attempts for us to get him on this show, has refused. So pretty soon, I think what we'll do is invite everybody from the London Assembly on at one time or another, so that everyone who works with Sadiq Khan will have been in the Independent Republic, and he'll be the only one that's too frightened for some reason.